Okay. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much, Vivian, for setting up the live stream. I wanted to welcome everybody who's joined us so far tonight to tonight's presentation on California native plant maintenance. Tonight, we will share with you a panel of 4 speakers: Madeline Morrow, Lior Dahan, Patricia Evans, and myself, Stephanie Morris. And I will be your host today, as well as being on the panel. Supporting the program tonight are our Q&A moderator, Gladys Mercier, and our YouTube and chat monitor, Arvind Kumar, and our tech, Vivian New. And thank you very much, all of you, for supporting this program. Before we begin, I'd like to ask how many are attending a CNPS, California Native Plant Society meeting for the first time tonight? And if you are, we welcome you. We're glad you're here and we hope you enjoy it. If you could raise your hand with the raise hand feature on the Zoom, or put your name in the chat box and tell us a little bit about how you heard about the program and anything else you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. Our chat monitor will be monitoring the chat while we are presenting, and will then relay those questions to the speakers as we go along. So for newcomers, this meeting is organized by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. We're a very active group. We have gardeners, we have conservationists, we have hikers, and all sorts of people who support the work of native plants. If you are not a member, we hope that you will consider joining our chapter, and you can find information here. Our chapter website is CNPS-SCV, which stands for Santa Clara Valley.org. And you can find all sorts of great information on our website. We're a nonprofit organization, and we were founded in 1965. We have over 10,000 members, and there are 35 chapters spread all over the state. Our chapter, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, covers Santa Clara, of course, and the southern part of San Mateo County.
Actually writing this material, you did a very good job.
Sounds like maybe we need to mute. Yep. The CNPS mission is to save California's native plants and habitats by bringing together science, education, conservation, and gardening to power the native plant movement. So we welcome you to support us. Membership benefits include a number of different publications, the Fremontia and Flora journals, and also our chapter newsletter, which is called the Blazing Star, which can be read virtually online. And below there is the website to join. So some of our other upcoming events, we have talks now on Wednesday evenings starting at 7:30 p.m. Our next talk is going to be Gardening for Biodiversity with Native Plants, given by Shelky Tao, and that's going to be Wednesday, February 3rd at 7:30. And then we're going to have a talk on the natural history of San Bruno Mountain with David Nelson and Doug Alshus. I'm probably mispronouncing that, apologies. Wednesday, February 17th, also at 7:30. And then we are going to have a talk on taking close-up plant ID pictures with a camera phone. And that's going to be by Dee Himes on February 24th. We will be continuing to add more talks, and we will be doing at least one gardening talk per month, as well as other talks on conservation and other subjects. The talks are all recorded on our YouTube channel, so you can go to the archive and see all of these talks, which is a fantastic resource for our community. I wanted to mention a little bit about our native plant nursery. It's going in full swing. Right now, you can order plants online. You can pick plants up at the nursery with curbside pickup, or you can also have plants delivered if you live between Belmont and San Jose. I have taken advantage of this ability to order plants, and it's fantastic. You could just order them online. You can choose your time to pick up, and it's a great way to support our chapter. We have a number of volunteers who spend countless hours at the nursery, so it's such a great way to support native plant conservation and get something great for your garden. To find out the latest information about events and our nursery sales and more, you can join our chapter news email list, and that way you will get weekly updates about all of our upcoming events. And here is the email below to subscribe. We will put this also in the chat as well, because it is kind of long. So to introduce our speakers tonight, we will have 4 different presentations of about 10 minutes each. And then after all the presentations are finished, we will take questions for the remaining time. We expect the program to end at about 9 tonight. And so quickly to introduce our speakers, my name is Stephanie Morris, and I'm a landscape architect, and I'm focused on creating designs that respond to ecology, aesthetics, and also functionality, with an emphasis on native plants and healthy soil, water conservation, and environmentally conscious materials. And Lior Dahan has a degree in environmental horticulture and owns a company called Rhythmic Gardening, an ecological garden maintenance company with a focus on working with nature to heal soil, grow healthy plants, and appreciate the wildlife in our gardens. Patricia Evans, the owner of Natural Landscape Design, specializes in native plants and also sustainable landscaping. And Madeline Morrow is a past president of our CNPS chapter and a current board member. Her garden was featured in Bay Nature magazine in March 2013, and she's been on the Going Native Garden Tour for many years. I wanted to mention the one interesting thing about this talk. It's inspired by our group because of some of our early history of how we organize gardening with natives meetings. Many years ago, our group was very informal, and we would meet kind of more as a roundtable group. We would discuss a topic each month, and so this is kind of a throwback to that era. We're bringing a bit of that history back, where we all get together, we talk about a subject, and we share ideas, but carrying it forward with the online format available to us today. So thank you very much, and I'm going to invite Madeline to go ahead and start sharing her pictures and talking about the first aspect of the native plant maintenance for tonight.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, my talk is going to be totally focused on iris, Pacific Coast hybrid iris to be exact. I love our native iris. There's incredible diversity in form and color. And I was trying to look for a picture of iris as they are after like a year or two in the ground with these beautiful clumps with many, many flowers. Well, for some reason, I don't have any photos, so I went to the Pacific Coast Iris website. They're all aficionados, and they have beautiful pictures. So this is when you plant an iris plant, it takes about a year to get established, and then you have this kind of thing that happens. And our iris, Pacific Coast iris, are much easier to take care of than the exotic garden iris, which are supposed to be divided every year. Ours will go for 5 or 6 years before you see the need for dividing. Well, I planted a lot of iris in 2000 and 2009, and I've only divided 1 clump. So it really is needed. Oops, yes. So this is what iris clumps look like when they need division. You see this bare space in the middle. Here it's like a ring, another ring, empty in the middle. These were trimmed back, but it's still very bare in the middle. And this is a place where deer grass grew over the middle, and so these are all places that need division. This is the one that I worked on for these photos. And you can see the edges here, they're very crowded. And here's another picture of how the deer grass has kind of shaded them out in the middle, and now they're really crowded and clumped, and they don't bloom very heavily anymore. This is where I started doing the division. Division is you put a shovel in there and you start breaking them up. And when you do this in the wintertime, you can, December, January, after the rains, they develop these little white growth roots, and this is what you want. And this is what, I used the shovel to kind of get in there and pull some up. And you also see this new red growth thing, and the white roots are over here. It was a little wet when I was doing this. And there's also this stalk that sometimes connects them, and I use shears to cut it. So after I dug up some things, this formerly very crowded area now has all of these little clumps that are left, or fans as they're often called, have a lot more room to breathe. And this is another area. So I expect that these will bloom much better in the spring. Then I wanted to plant some of my divisions or fans. So this is an area that's near an oak tree. It's covered with oak mulch. So I brushed back the mulch and I started digging a small hole. And here's one of the divisions. You can see here that sharp place where I disconnected it from part of it. There's a growing tip, and then there's these white, they're dirty, but they're the little white roots that they grow at this time of year. So here I am putting it into the small hole that I dug. I firmed up soil around it. And then I put the oak leaf mulch back. And this, I was cut off by rain. I only planted 2 divisions, and this is what I have left. This bucket, this was done yesterday. This bucket's out on my back porch. I expect it has water in them. So one of the things, this shows that when you divide an older clump, you have a lot of new iris to spread around your yard. I'm going to spread this around all under this oak tree. Iris are good, are very good under oaks. And so I'm spreading apart these divisions to create more of a ground cover under the oaks. And I still will have divisions to give away to friends, and I have promised some of them to the nursery. Unfortunately, I cannot remember what color these are. I looked through a ton of my old photos, and I don't have a single one of this particular iris in bloom, but I believe it was I believe it's similar to this with less white. The colors that you get in Pacific iris, you get colors, the purples, you get some blues, you get white, some have yellow, and then you get maroon, tan, pretty much all kinds of variations of colors except the pinks and reds. And some of them, from some of the local native species, they brought in like a sky blue, which you see in a few. Anyway, so unfortunately, you do need to do this in December, January, February, ideally, when it's not always exactly what you want to do, but the reward will be that you will have more and more iris that look like this. And I will turn it back over to Stephanie.
Great, thank you so much, Madeline. We will take any questions about iris after we've all presented, so please feel free to type any questions that you might have into the chat, and they will be collected. Thank you, and I will go ahead and introduce Lior Dahan now, who can go ahead and share her screen, and she's going to share with us some information about some of the pruning work that she's doing as part of her business.
Thank you. Share the screen.
Alexa, stop.
All right, so I'll be talking about a few plants that are recently pruned, toyon and coyote brush. I'll start off with toyon, also known as Heteromeles arbutifolia. And so this is a toyon that's about 5 or 6 years old. I think it was pretty heavily watered to start with. And then now more recently it got switched over to a monthly irrigation system. And so this is a that was never pruned, never got cut. This is just naturally how it grew. And for some of you guys, this is maybe what you would like from your toyon, but for this garden, we decided that we wanted something a little bit shrubbier. So I went ahead and pruned this back, and to kind of get that denser growth, all I did was take these large lateral shrub shoots that are just going straight up. I cut them all the way down.
Lior,
yeah.
your sound is a little quiet. Is it possible for you to get it closer to your microphone?
Maybe. Is that better? Hello? Yeah.
It's still a little quiet. Is there?
Let me see. I don't know if I can get it any louder.
Okay, that's fine. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay, maybe I'll talk later. So this is now what it looked like after I pruned it. You can see that basically all I did was take those big shoots that were going straight up to the sky, and I cut them all the way down to their source, or where that branch met a slightly larger branch, and I just cut it all the way down. And this will help kind of create a bushier plant, because what I'm trying to do when I made those big cuts was to almost shock the plant in order for it to get bigger and fuller so we could really fill up that space. And you can even see I didn't do too much more after those cuts. I, for the most part, left it somewhat natural. And if you want a cleaner bush, something that's a little more uniform, you could have made a few more cuts, taking these side shoots that are off to the side on both sides, and created a more uniform plant. But for this garden, we like the natural look of it. And so now, a year later, this is what it looks like. So we kind of achieved our goal by cutting those large shoots that were going up, straight up into the sky, by creating a much fuller bush. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. All these shoots that are going straight up, do need to be cut back down. But now we have a bigger, fuller bush to play around with, to really shape and prune as we want. And now we can be a little bit more pickier with our cuts. We have a little more options of where we want to go with it, and what we want the future of the bush to also look like. So now I have the Baccharis borealis. This is the pigeon point coyote brush. This is also an older bush, about 5 or 6 years old. And you can see that it's not very healthy looking. It's got a lot of dead wood in there. I don't know if you guys can tell. There's all pockets of dead shrubbery. It just didn't look very good. The back of it was also looking kind of raggedy and dead. And so now was the time to kind of think, like, what do we want to do with this? How do we want to revitalize it? And so there's a couple ways that you could do that. There's with coyote brush, you could either cut it down to about a third or half its size. And I only recommend doing that for healthier plants. When you get to a plant that just doesn't look very good, cutting down half of this or a third of this, it's just not going to look good. But if you've got a healthier, greener plant that maybe is only a year or 2 years old, you could definitely just cut it down to about half its size. And then just make sure to remove all that dead debris that you find. But another option with the Baccharis is just to coppice it. And coppicing is just cutting it down to its bare bones or down to its base. And so here's what it looks like after you coppice it. Basically, it looks like a dead plant. There's just a few structural bones that we left, structural branches that we left. We removed a lot of the dead debris. You could see in one of the plants all that dead branches. Cut all those out and left just a handful of the good branches. So now this is what it looked like actually, even on the same day that we pruned it in January. You could already see after we removed all that growth, all that dead debris stuff, we could already see new growth sprouting from these older branches. And this is from one of Stephanie's gardens. This is a plant that was coppiced, and then recently, sometime after that, this is kind of what it looks like. You can see it's a lot healthier, it's a lot greener, and now this is a plant that you could really kind of prune and shape as you want. But what's really important with Baccharis and all plants is to really lift up that greenery and get underneath there and get rid of all that dead wood shrubbery stuff. Because most hedges that have this kind of dense growth on the outside is not getting a whole lot of sunlight inside of it. So it's just a whole bunch of dead woody growth, and it's preventing airflow as well. So you want good airflow in all plants. So that removing that dead debris, woody material from underneath is also gonna help it look better for longer. And yep, that's all I got. So I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lior. So you can do the stop share. And then I will go ahead and introduce Patricia Evans next, who is going to share some other pruning information with us. Go right ahead, Patricia. And you can unmute yourself too.
All right, I'm unmuted, and I'm going to try sharing the screen. unmute myself and go to slideshow. All right. And then let me get this out of the way here. All right. Let me go back. Actually, I'm in the wrong place here. Let's see. Oh, dear. Oh. Whoops. Oh, dear. Let me get to the beginning of this. Okay, try it again. All right. We're talking about maintenance tonight, and there are many different aspects. And I thought I would start by telling you what are some of the mistakes that I have made as a gardener in the many years that I've learning to garden even before I became a landscape designer. And I'll just give little tidbits on each of these, and Stephanie will be saying more about several of them. First of all, planting. The biggest thing that I do is I go out and I buy a lot of plants because I love native plants. And then I don't get them in the ground in the right season. And often it's getting on into the spring in April, March and April before I get them in the ground. And they really should go in the ground October, November, December, when it's cooler and you have the rain, although this year, obviously, the rain came late, in order to get established before the summer comes. Particularly with chaparral plants, and I have a lot of unwatered areas in my garden. So planting, not getting around to planting is one of the problems. Watering, I have often put plants in the ground and then I don't remember to water enough the first summer. And until they are established, you have to water in the summer, even if they're chaparral plants, even if they're eventually going to have no water at all. Weeding. I have a tendency to let the weeding get away from me. I put down the papers and cardboard and I put the mulch, but there's always weeds, and there's some weeds that are just horrible. I'm sure that Stephanie will say more about those. And if you let them go, you're just cooked. And finally, pruning. There are some things that you can't prune too much. You can coppice a baccharis, but if you try and do that to a morning glory, which I did one time because it had grown up the fence and all over the place, but was beautiful, I cut it too much and it died. So you really have to know what you're doing. Well, we prune because we want to make the plant look cleaner and remove all the dead wood. And sometimes, as Lior mentioned, we want it to grow more compactly. But sometimes we are trying to adjust the size of the plant and keep a plant that really shouldn't have been planted where we have it there because it's too big for the space. So the first lesson is that you really have to plant the right plant in the right place so that you don't have to prune it to make it smaller. I violate that rule once in a while too. And that doesn't to say you can't do it, but you should know that you're in for, pruning permanently. You want to respect the habit of the plant. If it's a vine, it's going to grow up. If it's a tree, it's going to want to grow like a tree. And I think Stephanie's going to say more about this, but you always want to make the right kinds of cuts. You don't want to turn a tree into a very unruly hydra-looking thing with branches everywhere because you pruned it the wrong way. And you have to prune at the right time. I had a beautiful Garrya elliptica, that's the silk tassel, that for several years it didn't bloom and I couldn't figure it out because I pruned it in the fall along with a lot of other things that I pruned. Well, the fall is when the flowers are forming because it's winter blooming. And if you prune it in the fall, you'll never have any flowers. So you have to pay attention to when it blooms and preferably prune it after bloom. And then there are some things like manzanita and ceanothus that you have to prune in the summer because otherwise they're going to get fungus. They're just too susceptible. Here's a grape. I have this on the front of my house. It's huge. It's a Rogers Red. Whoops. I don't know why it's doing that. Let me see if I can go back there one. Whoops. Okay, well, it's just I'm not even touching my computer here, but it's got a mind of its own. It's that Rogers Red Grape is a very nice vine that I have growing on the front of my house, but it is a big pruning job every year because it grows like crazy. So I take it like this and okay, let's see. All right. It looks like this at the end of the season when all the leaves have dropped, and I have to cut it back a lot in order to keep it from doing something I don't want it to do. And here's what it looks like when it's pruned back. It's only about 6 inches away from the trellis. It's much narrower, it's shorter, and it will cover that whole wall again the next year. Here is a solanum, has a lot of dead wood. So I just clean that up. I cut out all the dead wood. That's a small perennial. And here's an Eriogonum fasciculatum. This is one of the plants, one of the few buckwheats that you can actually cut back to almost nothing. And I cut that back every year to about 18 inches tall and wide, partly because I have it in a fairly narrow space and I don't want it to be 3 foot tall and 3 foot wide. And then I have a mock orange, which really would like to have about an 8 foot space to grow those beautiful white fragrant flowers. You can see the giant branches here, but I don't have room for 8 foot tall and 8 foot wide where it's at. So this is a plant that is planted in the wrong place, but I didn't have the right place for it with enough space. So what I do every year is I hack it back. I cut out all the old branches that are big. I cut the newer ones back. I keep it down to about 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And here it is when it's grown out after it's been pruned, and it will be covered with white flowers shortly. So there is a lot of help that you can get in terms of pruning and also maintenance from some of the resources available at Yerba Buena Nursery. There's Las Politas Nursery. And then there's a landscaping company called Heaviland. If you just Google on Heaviland pruning, you'll get a beautiful pruning guide. And there is a wonderful book, and I'm going to escape from this hopefully and go back to stop screen sharing if I can do that. And this is a fabulous book right here. It's called California Native Gardening, a month-by-month guide by Helen Popper. And it will take you through what to do in terms of maintenance, when to plant, when to prune, when to start new cuttings, many, many tips month by month. And it's a really good guide if you are not only new to native gardening, but you've been gardening for a long time. And that's all I have to say, Stephanie.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. And I think your comment on right plant, right place is perfect, because I know many of us who love native plants, we are trying to put as many things we can sometimes in a space, and it's easy to get carried away. So the other thing I wanted to mention too about Helen's book, so I have my own copy sitting here, is that this book was generated through, in part, our Gardening with Natives meetings when we were doing this collaborative effort, sitting around the table chatting, and Helen was taking notes month by month, and some of that ended up in her book. And so I think that spirit is well represented here tonight, and also sharing her book kind of brings it full circle. But what she does is she actually does divide it up month by month. So you can go to the December, January, February months and check out what to do right now. And as we were brainstorming this talk tonight, we were thinking that we would like to do the same thing to some extent and have more than one maintenance conversation this year, with this one being kind of mostly focused on winter, and then bringing some more conversations in as we get into late spring and summer. So I will share a few slides here with a couple other pruning options. and conversations. Can everybody see that all right? Okay, so I have here a little chunk of my garden where I have a combination of California fuchsia and a small sulfur buckwheat, and also an edible eating grape. I like to mix in some edible plants for people as well as my native habitat plants. So this is what it starts to look like toward the middle or end of the summer. And I show this because I'm going to show how to trim each one of these plants as the season moves along. So if I haven't done it already, I would be deadheading my buckwheats and other perennial plants that are blooming with flowers. This year, I didn't deadhead everything. I let some of the seeds stay on the buckwheats, and I let some of the birds access those, and then I trimmed them back a little bit late in December because it was so dry and our fall was so long and it really extended in through December. So to trim back my buckwheat by deadheading, I just take my garden shears and trim back the flower all the way down into the foliage. And the picture which shows the larger view, you can see the buckwheat plants in the foreground have not been trimmed and deadheaded, and the ones in the back have. So you can get an idea of what the plant will look like after it is trimmed back. Then California fuchsia, what I do with this is I have a lot of the ground cover varieties, and I actually coppice these to the ground. I generally do that right about the first rain. So this year I did it late. It was just a couple weeks ago in January that I cut it back. I take shears, or I would take even like a hedging shear and just trim it all down along the ground. The way that you can tell that it is ready to be trimmed down and coppiced this way is that you'll start seeing some new growth come up at the base of the foliage. So it'll start to turn a little bit brownish. The flowers will all be completely finished. And then once the little new sprouts come up, you can trim it back. And it will regrow from the roots without a problem. This year, because we had such a dry January until very recently, I actually did water it once because it had gotten super dry, and I wanted to make sure that it was able to regenerate without a problem. Now, of course, we've got plenty of rain, so we're good to go with our watering. And then I wanted to show this picture because it will give you an idea of what the California fuchsia down in the bottom here by the path looks like in the early spring once it started to grow back out again. So you see this kind of soft grayish mat of foliage. And then to the left of that is a deer grass, which has been kind of combed out and is ready to start growing in the spring because it's a warm season grower. It wants to grow in the late spring and summer. And then the moundy bush behind it is the baccharis. So those are some of the ones that I had previously coppiced, like Lior was talking about, and then they've grown back in. And this year I actually decided to coppice only some of my baccharis because I don't do it every year. I do it about every 3 years or so. And I noticed that there was a lot of lizards living in some of the older baccharis. So I kept some of that for habitat, and then I coppiced some of them and left some. I wanted to mention a little bit about weed prevention because to me that's a big part of my garden maintenance activities, especially in January and February when the rains have started and the annual weeds are all germinating. So I do a lot of sheet mulching to fill in areas that are between the plants and need to have some weed prevention. So in this case, I've actually used newspaper, and I will cover the ground. I can actually do this right on top of the mulch that we have. I can use newspaper, I can use cardboard, I can use paper bags, and I will cover up the ground and then put a 3 to 4 inch or 4 to 6 inch layer, if I can, of wood chips on top. So I drew this little diagram at the top here to show what I do when I come up to a paved surface with the sheet mulching. The bottom right picture shows how the sheet mulching will look if you do not excavate down around the edge of the pavement. And you'll sometimes have a little bit of wood chips sloughing onto your landscape. So if you want those wood chips to be level with your paving, you'll actually dig a little channel, like a little 12-inch wide by a couple inch deep, like a 3-inch deep area, and put your cardboard or newspaper down, and then put the wood chips on top of that. The photo on the bottom left shows I used some paper bags to reuse to do some sheet mulching there for annual weeds. So most of the annual weeds generally don't grow through the sheet mulch, and I have plenty of those. I have the hairy bittercress in my garden. I have petty spurge. I have all sorts of dandelions, all sorts of interesting spurges and annuals, and most of those are suppressed quite well by the sheet mulching. What I have less luck with sheet mulching is some of the perennial weeds. So like the oxalis, I think somebody mentioned that in the chat already, the Bermuda buttercup. I find that this can make its way up through the cardboard layers and the newspaper, even if I'm overlapping it 6 inches or so. And then the Bermuda grass, same thing, it can find its way back through. So what I usually do with those is I will kind of continually pull the oxalis to try to deplete its growth potential before it flowers. And then with the Bermuda grass, I will try my best to dig it up and remove its roots, which can be a little bit challenging. If I don't have success with that, I have my handy weed torch, which is sort of my way of avoiding chemicals in my garden because I really don't like to do that. And sometimes the Bermuda grass will grow from around the paving, back into the landscape. So I can use this flame torch. I also use it on my paving stone walkway because I get lots of little weeds in between. And what I can't cut out using a sharp knife blade, I will use my little flame torch on to kind of help me keep down those annual weeds there. So one thing I wanted to mention is winter watering, because a lot of times we overlook watering in winter. We just assume the plants will get rain and that will be all that's needed. This year was kind of a good example because we are getting tons and tons of rain now, but up until now, it's been pretty much a drought winter. So I was actually watering my natives. And I learned this the hard way that many years ago, when we kind of had our last wave of drought, I didn't water my natives through the winter. And I realized that they were doing extremely poorly come summer and spring, like much more unusually poorly than I would expect. And it was because they hadn't had enough winter water to do the growth that they do. A lot of the native plants will really grow significantly in February and late winter and put on a lot of their flowers early in the spring. So if they don't get the water, not only do they not look good and flower in the spring, but they really can't achieve their full drought tolerance during the dry season if they haven't had a good wet season. So I will water if we have 2 to 3 weeks without rain. Even though I have a drip system on some of my garden, I will sometimes use a hose for that winter watering just because I want the soil to be evenly moistened. And if it's gotten really dry and I run a drip system, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, the water will not spread appropriately into the soil. So it's almost like the soil needs to be a little bit moist all over for the water to properly transfer. And then I wanted to mention a little bit about planting too. So is it a good time to plant right now? Absolutely. A few notes about planting right now is that when the soil is super saturated like it is right now because of our rains, we do not want to plant because we will end up with potentially getting a lot of soil compaction. As the people are walking on the soil, it gets compacted. And I've worked with some gardens where this has become a long-term problem because of just soil being stepped on when it's planted. And the soil is also so soggy that the plants can't sometimes get enough oxygen. So if the soil is too extremely wet, we want to hold off. If a species is extremely frost tender, like some of our Catalina Island species, that may be something you wait a few months to plant. If the soil is super dry, like it was a few weeks ago, then you're going to want to make sure you water the plant and all the soil around it very deeply when you plant. And in general, it's a super good time right now to plant annual wildflowers and to plant annuals from small pots. This picture is a plant I just purchased from Annie's Annuals, who in addition to our CNPS nursery has a really great safety protocol for distancing and picking up of plants, and they have a great selection of native annuals right now, which is really exciting. So that concludes what I have to say right now. I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to begin the question and answer phase of our meeting. So we can have Gladys help us comb through the chat and pick out some questions for our panel, and we'll kind of do our best to share them all.
Absolutely. Well, there's been a lot of great answers in the chat. So if you had a question that you asked in the chat, you might want to check right below it. There's been some really good answers happening there. Okay, I'm going to go kind of backwards. You know, we just had Stephanie. So Stephanie, there's a question about Achillea millefolium. Should you coppice it or deadhead it? And how do you limit the spread of that plant?
Okay, yeah, that's good, because I didn't talk about the yarrow, the Achillea millefolium. I think it depends a little bit on how you're using it. So I've used it in a couple ways. The one is just as a perennial, and the other is more of like a mowed lawn. And so when I'm growing it as a perennial, then generally what I will do is about fall, I will cut it back down to the base. So any flower stems that have come up, I'll cut them all the way down to the base. And that can basically happen anytime they're flowering. And I think this brings up kind of a broader point in general, which is that in general, we want to prune things after they've flowered when that particular plant is dormant. So that way you're not cutting off the buds or blooms from next year, and you're pruning the plant at the time before it's going to grow so that it can respond to whatever pruning you do, whether it's deadheading or shaping or anything else. If I'm going to grow yarrow as a lawn, then what I would do is just kind of consistently mow it or string line trim it so that it essentially doesn't flower, or so that any flowers that do happen to pop up are kind of more on the fleshier side, because as the flower of the yarrow matures, it gets pretty woody. And if you're trying to have a lawn space, you'll end up with these little woody spikes, which are not very enjoyable for a lawn.
Okay. We have a question here about the dead and unsightly narrow leaf milkweed stems. Should they be trimmed off after the seeds have been released, or do you leave those in place to kind of identify where the plant is and maybe provide protection for the new growth in the spring?
Madeline has her hand up.
Okay.
Well, I think, and this is something in general, I'm, talking about these plants used as perennials. You don't actually, in most cases, have to deadhead them. That is or cut them back immediately. That is an aesthetic decision. It's not essential for the plant. A number of the seeds of our native perennials are enjoyed by birds. So my take on this is now I let the Clarkia, the yarrow, annuals, and some perennials, I let the seeds sit there for a while. And if I get around to it, I cut them in winter. And as far as milkweed goes, well, if you have monarchs, there may be eggs on those plants. And so I err on, I leave the stalks because I'm always hopeful that I might have had a butterfly lay some eggs. So I don't cut them till the new growth starts. And milkweeds sprout late. Milkweeds come up typically in May, sometimes April, but they're not one of the early things to sprout. And
okay.
And you can always cut it and leave it on the ground if you think it's really unsightly. That's something I've done too, especially if they're flopping over on a path. And I also want to say that some perennials, if you want to, one of the reasons things get out of control is because we overwater them. And a number of our native perennials like yarrow and California aster, Symphyotrypton now, those are very aggressive if they're heavily watered. So if you're having a big problem with them, you might want to consider cutting back the water.
Okay. Going to ask a question here that probably applies to some of the softer things like the fuchsia and the buckwheats. Is there a best month to prune those type of things?
I can answer that since it was sort of part of my presentation. So for me, the California fuchsia, the best months for me have always been December, January. And for the buckwheat, Madeline brought up a good point about, making choices about leaving seeds on plants. So that's why I didn't end up trimming mine back until December. It could have been done a little bit earlier. I have also tried it where some years I actually don't deadhead at all. And I find the bush maybe gets a little bit stragglier, but it doesn't prevent it from continuing about its business growing. So the one thing I like, in addition to all the habitat potential with California natives, is that pruning season is somewhat flexible. There's kind of sliding rules for a lot of plants. And so buckwheat can be something that you prune back. If it's a spring flowering or summer flowering buckwheat, it could be pruned in late summer or fall. It could be pruned a little bit into winter, as far as I'm concerned. Anybody else have differing opinions or thoughts?
Well, I think the one thing is it's a lot easier to prune it before the new growth starts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things you want to be monitoring. And I'm thinking that as I said, I think it's good if you haven't pruned your epilobium, your California fuchsia, it would be good to get to it soon, because with all this rain, it's going to start growing. I mean, if you see a little tiny bit of growth, that's okay. But I have left it until spring, and then you have like 6-inch stalks. It gets a whole lot harder to prune.
Yeah, and then at that point, you're trying to figure out not to prune the flowering buds of certain plants, because they're already starting to make those. And if you prune too late, you end up preventing it from flowering.
So I have two more questions about milkweed. Of course, the aphids that get all over them. What do we do about that? And then do we actually know when the monarch eggs hatch?
Well, someone told me this as a folk remedy, and it started, person who helps me with California plant maintenance said that dried banana peels buried near the plant help. She brought me a whole bunch of them, and I tried it, and I had many fewer of those orange aphids. The orange aphids are exotic aphids, and that's part of the reason they get so out of control. They're an invasive species. Mm-hmm. So I started drying banana leaves. I mean, I know bananas are high in phosphorus. That might be it. I don't know. But I tried that. I mean, some people say, there's a lot of discussion about this on Gardening with Natives. People use insecticidal soap. Some people use just hose jets. But I know I got a lot better flowers after I used the banana peels, and there weren't so many aphids, because I had so many aphids. My milkweed wasn't flowering well.
Yeah. Do we know when the eggs hatch and we have caterpillars or little tiny guys? I don't know when they hatch.
I don't think. Yeah, I think we.
Okay.
I don't know when they hatch either. I mean, it's going to be in the spring, early summer, but I couldn't tell you which month specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the book, the Helen Popper book. It says that she suggests to fertilize native plants in January, but what type of fertilizer should be used?
I don't tend to fertilize my native plants. If I do anything, I'm going to use something organic and with very low NPK numbers. So it might be something like my soil tends to be low in nitrogen, but it's fine on phosphorus and potassium. So I use feather meal if I do fertilize, which is just pure nitrogen, but it's organic and it breaks down. But I really don't fertilize my native plants very much at all, except when they are in pots and I'm growing them, I fertilize them. And I use a liquid fertilizer then because they they grow much better. Otherwise, they get too leggy and they don't grow well enough, get bushy enough to plant them out successfully. But in the ground, I really don't fertilize very much at all.
Okay.
I don't fertilize either. I use mulch. But when
Yeah.
I'm planting, because I have a suburban yard, I think the soil was very poorly taken care of. It was scraped probably when the house was built, and the previous owners did nothing to improve it. So when I plant a plant, I use a sort of slow release organic fertilizer, and I'll put a tablespoon or so in the hole. I think it helps in my heavy clay soil. It helps encourage the roots. I get somewhat better survival when I do that.
Okay. I'm going to go to some questions that came up when Patricia was giving her presentation. How much can you prune a twinberry, and can it be cut short? I'm not sure that we know if it's twinberry lonicera, the honeysuckle.
You're on mute, Patricia.
Okay. Okay.
Still on mute.
Clicking it, and it's keeps saying the host is muting me, so I'm not sure.
You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
A twinberry is a honeysuckle vine.
Mm-hmm.
And mine has never gotten so far out of size, let's say, off the trellis it's on, that I've felt the need to prune it very much. It's more a case of pruning back dead wood and maybe pinching it so that it branches more. So I probably wouldn't prune it very much unless see, the twinberry is the one, there's two honeysuckles that are common, and the twinberry is the one that can be a little bit shrubbier. So I do tend to prune it just to keep it a little bushier, but it never gets so huge that I have to cut it back significantly.
Okay. We have a question about an old and vigorous trumpet vine coming under and over my fence from a neighbor who planted it very close to their fence. How do I keep it from coming under the fence into my garden?
Root barrier.
Okay.
At least it's not as bad as ivy.
Yeah. Or bindweed, or the non-native morning glory.
Yeah, that's not as fast growing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of creating a defensible space, whether that's pulling something out along your fence line, putting a root barrier in, various other methods just to give yourself a buffer from something you don't want in your neighbors. I'm assuming talking to your neighbor is out of the question if the plant can't be tamed from their side.
If you have a good relationship, you might ask them if possibly they're overwatering it, because a lot of people overwater. That would lessen your problem.
So some questions when Lior was doing her talk about toyon. This is a question that says, my toyon suffers from spider mites. How do you handle that?
There's probably a couple different ways you could do it. You could do like the neem oil or the soap sprays that a few people were talking about. But the big thing is you got to be consistent. You can't just spray it once and forget about it. Whatever technique or method of that you're going to use to try and get rid of those is you got to be persistent with it. So if you're using neem, you got to do it. You got to read the back of the bottle, and it'll tell you how often you should spray it, and follow those instructions, and be vigorous about it until you, at least for a month after, until you really don't see it. Yeah, you just have to be on top of it. I think that's the best way to get rid of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, toyon is in the rose family. And like many plants in the rose family, it is susceptible to a number of diseases. Fire blight is spread, probably there may be pears around, those evergreen pears, which are extremely susceptible to fire blight. And my toyons got fire blight until I got rid of the pears. The trouble is with fire blight, the only thing I think that cures it is copper, which you do not want to use. I would try opening it up and giving better air circulation, and possibly looking at other hosts in your yard that you could get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
I've had pretty good luck too. This may or may not always be something a person wants to do with their toyon, but I have had issues with one of my toyon and ended up coppicing the toyon. It will grow back so happily. I actually did an experiment where I used it as part of a horticulture garden, where I actually buried just branches, thick branches, you know, like 3-4 inch diameter branches in the soil, no roots whatsoever, and they sprouted. So it will sprout. If you do need to cut off, you know, a limb lower than even Lior was showing in her presentation, it will not hurt the plant. It will certainly change the structure of the plant, but it won't, it'll come back.
Yeah.
Especially if done in the winter.
This question is also about the toyon. Is it good to cut back 1 year's growth before the new leaves emerge? In other words, before the new growth develops? So it's about timing, I think, when to cut.
I think it's best to do your major cuts in the winter, after it flowers and after it produces its berries, and then thereafter you can kind of do smaller cuts throughout the year. Really, just don't make any big cuts throughout the year. The big cuts should be done in the winter. Big structural pruning cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And dry days too. Sorry to interrupt or talk over you, but yeah, making sure that doing any larger pruning is done. If you're doing it in the winter, do it on dry days, not when there's going to be a rain happening right afterward.
This maybe relates to this question. It says, I read recently that chaparral plants should not be pruned during the rainy season. Bacchus is chaparral and toyon is not, right? We have successfully coppiced Bacchus, but I forget when, probably in the summer. So is there anything about, I mean, it's the rainy season now. Is chaparral different than other?
Well, I guess my input on that would be, to me, I would do it right before the rainy season, because like Lior was showing, that Bacchus that was cut back is already growing back now. Yeah. So it's, yeah, you don't want to wait too late, because if you cut it to allow it to take advantage of the full rainy season, then it will have all that opportunity to grow. So I think there's also something to be said, for that, as well as just not cutting back when it's super damp and wet.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, Patricia, were you wanting to add something? I think you're on mute still.
Patricia, you're still muted. You got it. We're not hearing you. There you go.
Oops. Yeah, I think you might have hit it twice.
Yeah, it bounced. Okay.
Just leave it off.
There you go.
Okay. I have a large area of chaparral plants, and I prune most of that in the fall or early winter. But there are specific plants like manzanita and ceanothus that are better pruned in the summer because they're so susceptible to various fungal diseases. But for example, all my salvias and somebody had asked about Sphaeralcia ambigua, and all of last year's flower stalks from the soap plant, etc. All of those things I prune in the fall.
Okay. There are some other timing questions about when to prune. For example, ribes species.
Can you hear me? Ribes blooms in the winter, so you should prune it after it finishes blooming so that it has plenty of time to form the buds for next year. You don't want to prune it in the fall or you'll lose the flowers.
Mm-hmm. And how about pruning Galvicia speciosa, the island bush snapdragon?
I don't prune my Galvicia because I like the habit of it. There are two versions of Galvicia. One is a little bit more shrubby and one of them is a little bit more arching. It's like an arching shrub. And I have that kind. Well, I actually have both, but that kind, I really like the arching look, and I try to site it in a place where it can do that arching and, you know, the branches can spread out, and I don't prune it.
I've had pretty good luck pruning mine when needed because I've had both varieties. And I have one where I've planted it in a space where it doesn't have room to get much bigger than about 3 feet. So I've cut it back pretty hard, and I can't say that I've ever had a problem with it ever growing out, no matter what season I've cut it. I've cut it in, you know, late fall would probably be the most common, because usually I'll cut things back knowing that I'm going to have to give them a little bit of water to regrow. So with a perennial or a kind of a semi-woody plant like that, I'm trying not to do it in the middle of the summer unless I'm willing to water it a little bit so that I can recover from that. The only thing about some of the Galvicia, they can be a little frost tender. So if you're pruning it right before frost season, its new growth might come up, and then it might be more susceptible to frost because of that. So that's something to think about. So I've had pretty good luck trimming it back most of the time.
How about pruning a spice bush? Can't remember the botanical name for that one right now.
Calycanthus. Calycanthus.
Calycanthus, yeah.
Mine aren't. I have one, and what I've done got one that has gotten fairly big, and I pruned a couple canes down to the ground. That's what I did. It's from its habit. That looks like what you want to do because it has a kind of sort of arching habit. I don't know.
I have a spice bush also, and they can get huge. They can be, you know, 12 feet wide and 10 feet tall, and I don't have space for that. So what I have done up until this year is I've cut out all the old big branches and just left the new, smaller, younger branches, and that has kept it into a reasonable size. It still blooms well and so forth. So in the winter, in December, I just cut out everything that's not small. This year, I tried something different because I read that it responds well to coppicing. I cut the whole thing down to the ground. I can tell you next year how it does, but I fully expect it's so well established. It grows so strongly every year. I think it'll just bounce right back, but with a little bit smaller bush.
I want to say about coppicing, another plant that can take coppicing is redbud, western redbud. I read about this, that native peoples would cut them to the ground, some of them to the ground every year to get new straight stems for basketry. And it responds well to this. So I have a redbud that has gotten, well, the oaks near it are now shading it. So it's in too much shade and its branches were arching. So every year I cut out about half the stems, so I'm able to keep it to about 5 feet. And by cutting out the biggest stems, I get some flowering, and then instead of having to remove it, it's a fairly easy way to keep it to a certain size, since I planted it in the wrong place ignorantly. But a lot of native plants can be coppiced. I also coppiced a Pacific wax myrtle that had spider mites really bad, and it came back much healthier.
Okay. So a couple more species for pruning advice. The Carpentaria, the California bush anemone.
I could answer that unless somebody else wants to. I usually actually was going to show pictures of that, but then I thought, well, I think I usually prune it a little earlier than this. So I usually, there comes a time in that plant's life where it tends to make older dead leaves, and I pick those off. You can also trim that one back. You can trim off old woody canes that are less sightly. And what I do is I also deadhead it, and I trim the flowers kind of back to a node in the plant after it's totally finished blooming, which was usually fall for me. I have actually coppiced that one as well, and it will come back and looking fantastic and new with new growth. So you can cut back, kind of like we were talking about with the spice bush. You can cut back a stem or stems. You can head the whole plant back a little bit if you want to keep it compact, or you can really deadhead. Or if you're like me and you skipped all that entirely, you can just let it go about its business and it will probably still be fine.
Okay. I do want to say that we will get to the questions about the irises in a minute, but there's a few more about the woodier plants. How about elderberry? The person that sent this question says they have a very young elderberry. It may need to be moved. Is there anything about moving and pruning and timing of that kind of activity?
I have an elderberry, and since I put in a rain garden, a catchment basin near it, it has grown, well, it's grown very fast. You can do just about anything to an elderberry and it will not die. So you can, and my belief would be if you need to move it now, but elderberries tend to sucker. You may find that there's a young sort of sucker coming off your plant, and that would probably be one of the best things to replant. That's one of the things you also have to do with an elderberry to confine it, is like every year we trim off suckers because it's trying to make an entire grove of elderberry. It's a wonderful habitat plant, and I'm very glad I have it in my yard, but it needs tough love if you don't have an acre or so. And of course, if you can grow it drier, but mine is near the fence. In addition to my catchment basin, my neighbors overwater, and so it's sucking up all that water from the neighbor's lawn. So I have an
elderberry also, and it's kind of a love-hate relationship because mine just has a single bubbler, and apparently it's not getting too much water because it never suckers, but it still grows about 8 feet every year. And finally, when it got too big a few years ago, I cut the whole thing down to just the trunk, and I left the trunk only about 2.5 feet tall. And of course, it grew a lot of branches, which I then had to prune back the next year and take some of them out and kind of form a new tree. But every year it's a major pruning job because it really does grow a lot. And unless you have a big space, you have to prune a lot out of those. But it blooms beautifully, and the birds love the fruit, and it's a nice screen along the fence. So it has a lot to recommend it, but it can be a pretty big pruning job every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my experience is exactly.
Okay. One more about the transplanting the volunteers I get from flowering currant. Is it easy to transplant them? When should you transplant the volunteers?
Have any of us done that before?
I have never gotten volunteers. You're doing something right in your garden. So just be happy and try it, because I have no idea. I would probably do it in the fall because they're going to be more dormant then and getting ready to grow. And in the cooler weather, they're more likely to take root. That would be what I would try, but I've never had volunteers.
Okay.
I would think because, these things tend to start coming up in, late winter, and they're very tiny at first. I mean, you could dig them up and, which would take, a little bit of, like you could practically do it with a tablespoon when they start, and put them in a pot and then grow them in the pot until the next fall. I don't have current reseeding, but I have toyon reseeding. I confess I have a lot of toyon. I just pull them up.
Okay, let's do some iris questions. There's quite a few. Madeline, you spoke about the way they grow out into the circle and it's bare in the middle. What's happening there? Why do they get bare like that?
That's an existential question. It's just what they do. And I don't know. It just seems they sort of exhaust themselves. And you see some other plants that do that. For example, Mexican sage does the same thing.
Okay. There's a question about blue-eyed grass. Does it have a similar problem? And I
No.
guess that means, does it get bare and does it need to be divided? And
Blue-eyed grass is totally different. Yes, it's in the iris family, but what it does, it's basically a short-lived perennial, but it reseeds itself vigorously, which I love, and I have a lot of blue-eyed grass in my meadow. It actually grows well in heavy clay soil with other grasses. And the only thing I do with blue-eyed grass is, if I get around to it, I trim them when they get all dark and when they get dark, when the seed heads look dark, and they shake them out. But you don't have to divide them. They're not long-lived plants. I think they tend to grow for like 3 or 4 years, but it's not a problem because they reproduce themselves really well.
the reseeding. Okay.
Madeline, how much water do you give your blue-eyed grass? Is it in full sun or part sun? And then how do you water it?
Okay, my blue-eyed grass is in my meadow, and my meadow has a number of environments. It has a very hot. My meadow was former lawn, so we still have sprinklers, and we water once a week to every 2 weeks, depending. But I have noticed the blue-eyed grass likes the area where it's a little shadier. Out in the sunnier parts of the lawn, I have things like greendelia, yarrow. So so I would say blue-eyed grass, at least we're in a hot location, appreciates partial shade. It doesn't grow in deep shade, but it likes partial shade.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thanks.
Okay. So a question about the native Douglas iris is the same. Does the same thing happen? The growing out, the circle, the dividing?
Well, the only Douglas iris I have, I think, is Canyon Snow. And I was going to say Canyon Snow is resistant to that. It doesn't happen as quickly. I have now a probably 12-year-old clump, and I'm just beginning to think that maybe I should consider dividing it. Canyon Snow is a very, very vigorous plant, and nothing much seems to phase it. It just kind of gets bigger without mostly dying out in the middle. And I don't know if that's true for other Iris Douglasiana. I don't have any other. I don't know if other people grow it.
Mm-hmm. Here's somebody that is growing it and says that it's under a Chinese elm and they have scarcely ever bloomed with flowers. Is that too much shade?
Well, probably. All of the iris like partial shade, sort of medium to partial shade, and in the right location, full sun. I have a hot, valley location, and my iris does not do well in full sun. In some places like Palo Alto, where they get more fog, or along the coast, you can grow them in full sun. But I think they're not. I think that if they don't flower, they're probably getting too much shade. I don't really know if. I think elms are pretty heavy. I think they give pretty deep shade, and they also often grow under oaks, and oaks are often more dappled shade.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably a shade issue, and if you move them away, you probably get better flowers. Or the other thing, if something isn't doing well, and something like iris that's easy to move, divide it and try things in different locations, and you'll find out what it likes in your yard.
Okay. Let's see. Does anyone know, are native irises deer and gopher resistant?
I have gophers, and I've never seen the gophers bother the iris. Actually, the gophers don't bother most of my native plants. The only ones I've had trouble with are the island mallow. They love that. I'm giving up on it. But no, I mean the iris, and I've heard that iris are deer resistant, that they're bitter and deer don't tend to go for them.
Okay. How about pollinators and iris? Do any of the iris attract pollinators? Or which pollinators, I guess?
I have seen bees on my iris,
Mhm.
including native bees.
Okay. Okay, let's see. We have more time, so let's go to more questions. Let's see. This is about, now we're going to switch to oak trees. So is there any particular time that gardeners should not trim oaks? For example, the Engelmann oak and our Quercus agrifolias. And then there's actually questions also about manzanita and other things. But what about oak pruning?
Did I hear that you were going to say something, Patricia? I didn't want to speak over you. I think the generally oaks, from what my understanding, is more like a summer to fall pruning is ideal. And now is probably the time you don't want to prune an oak.
Yeah, that's my understanding too, because I think they tend to get fungal diseases, and you want to do it when it's dry and you know, the wood doesn't get exposed to the moisture and the fungal spores that are flying around in the rain here.
Mm-hmm. And its dormant season is really summer. So like with most things, pruning it when it's dormant so that it can respond to the growth when the growing season happens in the winter.
We have better resources on native plant maintenance, but when I started out, there wasn't that much written. But I did, you know, and I had some oaks that were they were planted too close to get, squirrels planted them, not me. And so I wanted to prune them, and I was kind of like, when do you prune them? And I found the principle: you prune things when they are most dormant. So I thought about it. Oaks are dormant in the summertime. So I pruned my oaks in July.
Okay.
And I think up until September, and these days it seems like October is a fine time to prune them. We had an extended pruning period this year.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, it seems like summer went till Thanksgiving this year.
Okay. So some more questions about pruning, the more perennial kind of things and the softer things like salvias and monkey flower and even the penstemon.
Mm-hmm.
Anything particular going on with any of those that we need to know?
Well, I pruned salvias in late winter. Well, I guess more in early winter. They tend to be early bloomers, and this is a problem with, you know, I put some salvias in places where they don't really have room, and they also tended to get kind of woody, and I did cut them back all about 12 inches, cut off the dead flowers, trimmed branches back to like a strong lateral, and I just, you know, took a flyer, and it responded really, really well. This I think this was a Salvia leucophila, and I've tried it with other salvias with black sage, and I've seen them respond well to mild pruning in my experience. And I cut, and then there was another question about whether you want to cut the flower stalks off of hummingbird sage. It's not important, you know, they can be a little unsightly, so it depends on what your appetite for pruning is.
I have different kinds of salvias, and the leucophylla and the Clevelandii ones I tend to prune in the fall, late fall. This year was perfect because it didn't start raining early, and I cut them back quite a bit, down to maybe 18 inches tall and wide. The Mexican sage, I cut it right down to the new growth at the bottom, so it's only a few inches tall and everything else comes off. And the hummingbird sage, it does tend, you get these long woody stems, and I've done a lot of pruning on that where I've cut it back to just the new growth around the base, and it responds really well. So I think you can, you know, I would probably not prune some of the salvias. Actually, I have a black sage, and I've done that in the late summer as well when it's still dormant, and that's responded very well in the following year.
There's sort of the two types, right? There's the more woody sages where you can't cut those back too far into the dead wood or the woody part of the plant, or they won't rebound as well. And then there's the more tender sages where you can cut them back more significantly.
Does anybody have any thoughts about the monkey flower or the penstemons?
I deadhead my penstemons and cut the dry growth back, you know, cut it back maybe about by 1/3 to 1/2, and it comes back bushier. And I do the same thing with monkey flowers, and because it gets pretty woody, so if you trim it a bit and pinch it, it responds well. Monkey flowers can be prima donnas, and I have my best monkey flower is one I'm growing in a container. It loves growing in a large container, and it blooms 10 months of the year.
Yeah, I have the same experience with monkey flowers. They're beautiful, but they're short-lived in the ground for me, and I tend to grow them as sort of 3-year plants and they do very well in pots. They should be cut back quite severely. This time of the year, you'll see just a beginning of new growth, and you can whack them down to just the trunk and really cut them back severely, and they will usually bounce back. But then about after maybe 3 years or so, they just peter out, or you cut them back and they never come back. So I think they're sort of short-lived perennials.
They're one of those, excuse me, they're one of the plants where you can actually see sometimes the new growth start to emerge on the woody portion of the stem. And then you know, okay, this plant's going to respond favorably if I cut down into this woody portion because it's already sprouting new leaves. And I think somebody, I saw a chat question about the coyote mint. The coyote mint will kind of do the same thing. It will actually start down in its wood. You'll see these new little green leaves emerging, and then you know you can cut down to those and it will respond with positive new growth. And I've seen some of the smaller, well, I guess maybe all of the buckwheats that same way, you know, where you can tell that it will respond favorably by its new growth.
Yeah, I've had good luck pruning rosy buckwheat, Eriogonia grande rubescens, and which is also, I think, a short-lived perennial, but it reseeds.
Reseeds like crazy.
And coyote mint, I prune that pretty hard, and it really it comes back really lush and compact, and it flowers better. And I guess late summer, fall is a good. Early fall is often when I do those.
Yeah, I had good luck with that with the coyote mint as well as the Eriogonum crocatum. I had one that was just kind of rangy and had a terrible form, and so I took a chance and cut it back, and it responded well.
Okay. We didn't talk too much about grasses. There's a question about pruning and maintenance for deer grass, and also I think it's rye, canyon prince rye, and gophers. So maybe a little time on grasses.
Did you want to mention your deer grass combing technique, Lior?
You're muted.
Sure. Yeah. So you just take like a long rake, and you could just really get in there with your rake right in the center of the grass, and just really pull it out. And you'll get that one every time you rake it out, you'll just get a big clump of browning leaf foliage. You can just do that until you basically have just see green stuff and green growth, green leaves. But you could also cut it back all the way down to the ground, or about a foot off the ground. And for older plants, it's probably more advised to just cut it down, because that'll give it a fresher new growth. It's a little easier, I think, to just cut it down rather than do all that work of taking your rake and really getting in there. You could just take a hedger and just chop it down to about a foot off the ground, and then you still want to rake out that mound that you've created, just because it'll be dead foliage and leftovers from pruning it. And then a month later, you'll like already see fresh new growth, really green growth coming out of it. And then much later, you have an even fresher plant, much greener, and much healthier looking.
Do you tend to do that every single year, or do you do it every couple of years in the gardens you work on?
It depends on how it's being used in the garden, and it depends like how pretty the garden needs to be as well. For a garden that's a little more that is not as natural looking, I'll do it every year. But for a garden that kind of likes a more rustic kind of look, you could do it probably every 2 to 3 years or so. But still, if you're not going to cut it back, it's still a good idea to rake it out then, just because all that, like I was saying, all that dead material that's going to be in it is just going to sit there, and then there won't be any room for that new growth if you don't rake it out. Yeah.
Excellent.
Did anybody have comments about the Canyon Prince rye grass, maybe maintenance for it? And also someone has a problem with gophers and rye grass.
I haven't specifically grown that Canyon Prince rye in my yard, or the one experience I have with it, it was quite a spreader. So I've been quite honestly, a little hesitant to use it too significantly in designs unless it's bound by paving. Remind me what the specific question was. Was it about pruning it?
Well, since we're on maintenance, I thought we could talk about pruning it, but the question was that it's being destroyed by gophers. So I guess they are pruning it. Is that gophers and ryegrass? Is that a common issue?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I know a lot of times some of the grasses can be susceptible to gophers, but I don't have a specific, expertise in that grass and gophers on any of the projects I've been doing. I've had some grasses and plants destroyed by gophers. I mean, you could always try to, since it is a spreading grass, when it's happy, you could always try to cage it with a gopher wire cage and see if you can get enough established that it could withstand gophers.
There's kind of a related question which says, is anything gopher resistant?
Not mallow. Well, anything that spreads typically is going to be a little more resistant because it is going to have, just the capacity to want to continue to move outward. Now, there's some things that, like the Lavatera, right? It's a super aggressive spreader, but even still, the gophers can tend to get it. What I would tend to do if there's a big gopher problem as the first tier is just to try to use the gopher wire mesh baskets that are sized to the plant to try to get the plant at least a head start in getting some root. But still, some gophers will go over the mesh, and it's a tricky situation.
I may be lucky in that my yard got established, because my observation has been that gophers do tend to bother the well irrigated yards more than my native yard. But no, now since more people are not watering as much, they have found my yard. Really, the only plant that has been killed is 2 of them, Lavateras, trying to get them established. I guess I could do it in a gopher cage, but I just worry that they're going to get it eventually, and so I'm probably going to plant a bladder pod there instead. Nice. But I'm not nuts about gophers. Occasionally I'll have them trapped if they're making too much of a mess, but they don't kill my plants.
I've heard they can be a little tough on yarrow too. I bet they couldn't kill an elderberry.
No, but it seems, I think a lot of the plants, since they've evolved with gophers, they seem to have strategies to deal with it.
The other thing that one of my clients who has a gopher issue, and among her oaks that was taking down some of her perennials, she has some of the ground cover baccharis, the ones that Lior was sharing in her pictures. And the one thing that's nice about some of those is that they do tend to root as the stems go along the soil. So ground cover baccharis will do that. Some of the ground cover sages, like the Salvia bee's bliss, so that if you were to get an intrusion of gophers in one part of the root of that plant, there's probably other parts of it that have already rooted that maybe the whole plant won't be decimated by the gophers. So that's another strategy.
And I do have a problem with rabbits, and so I have learned any new plant has to have a wire fence around it. And I planted Salvia apiana, the white
Oh,
sage,
yeah.
which is extremely strong. I said, I don't need a cage for this. Well, something bit it off, left it lying there. I mean, they'll never do it again, but they killed that plant. The next one, I put a wire cage around it. And I find that when plants are big enough, the rabbits don't go for them. But any young plants I find they have to be caged.
Yeah.
At least you can get above the rabbits with some of the species, like the manzanita behind you and in your picture there, at least it can grow up high enough that rabbits can't get it.
Yeah.
I tend to cover all my new plants also with wire baskets, and until they get established and growing. And once they get bigger, and once I got a dog, I don't have a problem with rabbits anymore.
There you go. Yeah. So we're at 9 o'clock, Stephanie. Maybe we have to wrap up the questions, and I'll turn it back to you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Gladys. You have done a fantastic job navigating all these questions. It was a much longer question and answer session than we might normally do. So thank you. You became
No problem.
moderator yourself.
I kind of wish everybody that asked questions should scroll up and down in the chat window, because there's a lot of amazing, fabulous answers in there. Maybe we could capture it somehow.
Right. And definitely I wanted to thank everybody who actually did take the time to go ahead and answer some of the questions that others were asking, because it's just great to have a community of folks who are sharing and helping, and that's what we're all about. One thing I always say is we are all learners here, and we are always learning, and we learn from each other. So it's really enjoyable.
And it is possible to save the chat for, and if you're those of you who are watching on Zoom, if you just pull down on the 3 dots next to the where you put in your questions, you can save the chat from there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Judy. And so I wanted to thank Judy for being behind the scenes tonight, as she has been for many of our meetings, and Arvind Kumar, who is doing some great behind the scenes work tonight, and Vivian for doing all the organizing work and coordinating and getting quite a number of us back together to really reinvigorate this Gardening with Natives portion of the lecture series, which I'm really excited that we're doing. It takes a group of really enthusiastic individuals. So thank you, and thanks for everybody who attended. We had a fantastic turnout. I hope you have got most of the answers that you wanted to get. And we have our Gardening with Natives chat group too as well, which is always available and open. What's the simplest way, Madeline, for people to join that Gardening with Natives chat if they aren't already on it? Are you aware of that? I may be asking you, and maybe you're.
I can answer.
Judy can answer it.
Yeah. So it's on the website. If you go to the website
Vivian.
and just under the gardening menu up at the top, cnps-scv.org, go to the gardening menu, and the very first option there is for the Gardening Natives Forum, and there is a subscription box right there on that page.
Thank you, Vivian. Yeah, I knew there was probably a simpler way.
I knew it was on there somewhere, but I had to go look. But Vivian knew right off the top of her head.
Excellent. Okay, so Vivian, as the tech organizer for tonight, is there anything else we need to do before we close out, or are we all complete and we should say thank you and have a good evening to everybody?
I think we're good. But just like Judy said, if anybody wants to save the chat out, they can, and that's in the ... at the bottom of the chat, where you type in your messages. Over on the right side, you should see a little ... button. And if you click that, there should be a way for you to save the chat out. So.
Perfect.
I do have one question. Someone asked if we could include the references, and I think that I've managed to put them in the chat. I believe that that's what I just did. So if you do want to get the references, I see there's a link there. The last one, it didn't get the name. California Native Garden Month by Month Guide is by Helen Popper. So if you save the chat, you'll have the links to the references.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patricia. And it looks like somebody else also put in information about a class in here. I'm just kind of trying to read it while we are finishing here.
Somebody listed a pruning class, right?
Fantastic. Good. Well, great. Well, thanks a lot for everybody for attending, for all these great resources in this conversation. And we hope to see as many of you as possible at our next event on February 3rd with Shelky presenting. So good night and thanks again.
Okay, I'm going to be